What's going on, guys? Today we're coming to you from downtown Los Angeles at the On Some Shit LA store. And since it's Thursday, we have Tech Thursday. And for today's installment, we're going to be going over the dimensions, geometry, and specifications of a BMX bike, what you should be looking for when you're getting your first bike, and when you're ready to upgrade to an aftermarket frame, what measurements, lengths, and dimensions you're going to be needing for your type of ride. So the first measurement that you're going to want to know is the top tube height. And that's going to be indicative of your actual height. So how do we measure this? For starters, you take a tape measure and you go from the center of the head tube, this pipe here, to the center of the seat post. So most of your complete bikes come at a 20.5-inch top tube length, and that's basically the average. A 20.5-inch top tube length is usually for someone that's anywhere between 5 feet tall to 5.5. Then if you're in the 6-foot range, you want a 21-inch. So if you're under 5 feet tall, then you're going to want a top tube that's 20 inches or lower. Some companies make 18, 18.5, 19, 19.5, and just a flat out 20-inch top tube. There are companies out there that make below a 19-inch top tube, but that's something you might want to get custom, or altogether get an 18-inch bike. Usually a 20.5-inch top tube corresponds with a 20-inch wheelbase. Alright, so once you've narrowed down your search and you've found a few bikes with a top tube length that's according to your height, the next thing you're going to want to worry about is standover height. This is a 2017 Sabrosa Lashon Kabza Signature Salvador model, and this really cool copper burnt orange colorway. And I'm going to take it off the stand real quick to show you guys what I'm talking about. So the standover height is basically the height of this top tube to the center of the bottom bracket. And the reason that's important is it's mainly for how you get on the bike and when you're doing tricks. And the reason the standover is important is because people can step over the top tube easier when it's lower, and that's really important for tellers. So on average, frames nowadays are about 8.5 inches or lower. I've seen them go all the way down to like 7 inches, which is really low. And basically what happens is that the top tube meets the seat tube way lower, and it almost looks like a scooter. I usually ride a frame that has about an 8.75 to about a 9.5 inch standover height. And the reason is just I like the more traditional looking BMX frames, and that's like something that I've been accustomed to. And I don't have a problem getting my foot over the top tube when I'm doing tellers. Another reason that the standover height is important is because it dictates the shape of your frame. So usually BMX bikes have two important triangles. That's the top tube, the down tube, and when they meet here at the seat post. And the rear triangle is seat stay, your chain stay, and where they meet here at the dropouts. Ideally, when you have more of a traditional measurement, it gives the frame a look of a double diamond. So you have one triangle here and the other triangle there, and they basically form a really nice flow. When you start lowering this too much and you start giving it that look of a scooter almost, you have to actually change the way it's welded and the angle it comes and meets the seat stay, and it just doesn't give it that nice natural look. So I prefer a more traditional standover height just so that it gives it a nicer aesthetic. Alright, so we've already covered the top tube length, the standover height, and the next important measurement that we need to worry about is the head tube angle. And most complete bikes nowadays come with a 74.5 degree head tube angle, which is pretty traditional. But there are bikes and aftermarket frames that come with a steeper head tube angle. So what that means is that the position of your wheel will get shorter. So when you make the head tube angle steeper, so that means that you're going from a 74.5 degree head tube angle to 75, or I've seen all the way up to 76 degrees. What that does is that it brings your wheelbase closer to your feet, and it actually makes the bike shorter, more responsive, and more twitchy feeling. What that means is that since your wheels are a slightly bit closer, it does give it the feel that the bike is shorter, so it does make it easier to spin. The main reason why people like steeper head tube angles is not really for the length, but it's for the position of your front wheel and the axle. What that means is that your axle will be closer underneath your chest. And the reason for that is that basically your chest and your arms will be more over on the wheel, and it would allow you to get in that position easier. Now when people want a more mellow head tube angle, so you go from like 74.5 to about a 74, or I've seen 73.25, something like that, that makes it so it's more laid back. So that means that the head tube is more relaxed, the wheelbase is longer. People that usually like riding trails or airing out quarter pipes and just flowing around, they like that because it's less responsive. And what that means is that when you're leaving the transition and you kind of like get in the air, it's not going to be really twitchy feeling, and you can kind of like whip her out better, and it's just a better feel. It's more traditional. Also keep in mind that when you have a steeper head tube, your foot, depending on your height and the size of your shoe, your foot might actually hit the front tire since it is closer. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind. If you do make your head tube steeper, make sure you also have shorter cranks or you have smaller feet. You know, that definitely will be something you'll have to deal with. All right, so now we've covered the majority of the angles on the front triangle. Let's move over to the rear triangle. So the next measurement is the chainstay length. And on average, you're looking at about a 13.5-inch rear end. Anything in the 13.65 and longer is obviously going to make the rear triangle longer. And a longer back end is more conducive for trail riders, racers, and really tall people. Obviously, if you start stretching out your bike, your wheelbase gets longer, so your bunny hop is a little different and more difficult for a shorter rider. You actually have to yank more both on the front end, and then you have to lift more on the back end to get it up higher. A lot of people have started moving over to like having like a really short back end. So that's a 13 flats or even like 12.75, 12.85. When your back end is more compact, that means that the axle will be further in on the dropout, and then it'll shorten up your wheelbase again, which, as we talked earlier, that makes it more responsive and it's easier for spins. Also, you shorten up your distance on your drive chain by having less links in the chain since it's now more compact. And also, it changes your position of the wheel when it comes to do with manuals, ice picks, or anything on the back end. So, since it's lower, it's going to be more responsive to like looping out. So you have to keep that in mind. You don't want to go too short because then your bike will be way too responsive, and when you're going to like do an ice pick or anything, it'll change that position of your peg, and you'll actually either have to be like more upright or pull back more depending on the length that you've chosen. One thing I should mention is that when you want to measure these things out, you usually want to go from the center of everything. So in order to get the chainstay length, you want to go from the center of the bottom bracket to the center of the axle. In order to measure the head tube, you go from the center of the head tube to the center of the seat stay. And then when you're changing the degrees of position, that basically you're going to assume a flat plane. So if this is a 90-degree angle, the higher the number, the steeper it is, the lower the number, the more mellow it is. Okay, and since we're down here, we might as well talk about the bottom bracket height. Usually a bottom bracket height measures the center of the bottom bracket to the ground with the wheels already on. An 11.7-inch height on a bottom bracket is pretty average. If your height gets lower, so you're looking at like 11 inches or anything like that, that means that the bottom bracket is going down. And what that does is it changes the position of your bottom bracket to your axle alignment. And what a lot of people say about that is that since you're closer to the ground, you actually have like a different position, and it allows you to bunny hop higher. I don't really mess too much with the bottom bracket height because I like to do like cricket grinds and different grinds like that. So if you have a taller bottom bracket, it won't hit while you're grinding. So that's personally why I don't change that too much. So if you do want to make your bike a little more compact, you could bring it up a slight bit, but you don't want to change it up too much because then you're going to be a little higher up in your axles, and that'll change up a lot of your positioning. All right, and last but not least, we have the seat tube angle. A 71-degree seat tube angle is pretty much traditional, but some companies like to bring it back and make it more mellow to about a 69-degree angle. And what that does is it actually gives you more space on your top tube. So let's say it's a 21-inch top tube. By bringing it back 1/4 inch or 2 degrees, what that'll do is that it'll make it feel like it's a 21 1/4 inch top tube length, but while still having the same geometry of a 21 flat inch top tube. And people like that because you can kind of get away with like shifting a little bit of leg room without compensating too much geometry. But on average, those are measurements that not a lot of brands seem to change. So just keep that for reference, but you don't have to worry about it too much. All right, so that basically covers all of the major measurements on your bike. And keep in mind that a lot of companies do alternate these quite a bit. So like I said earlier, you have a 21-inch, 20.5-inch, which is the average, 20 flat-inch top tube length. But a lot of brands do have a 20.75, 20.85, 21 1/4, 20 1/4, 20 3/4. You know, a lot of different measurements for it. So for reference, I'm 5'9", I ride 20.75, but I have friends that are 5'8" and ride a 20 1/4. So a lot of that has to do with like personal preference. But rule of thumb is, you know, get on a friend's bike and whatever feels more comfortable to you is what's best for you. All right, so that's gonna wrap it up for today's Tech Thursday. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If there's any measurements that didn't quite make sense, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll try and cover it. And if there's something more you want to get to know about a bike, just make sure to leave me a comment as well, and I'll try and see if I can get it into my schedule. But that's going to wrap it up for me today. As always, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and tune in for next week's Tech Thursday. Peace, guys.
It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. time to live, but that we waste a lot of it.